So in this problem, we're given that Carl made deposits of $120 for several consecutive months. So this could be from January to May. Each month, he made $120 deposits on the 15th of each month. And then for the remaining months of that year, he withdrew $50, again on the 15th of each month. So in the way the problem is described, the deposits are always made consecutively, and then the withdrawals are made consecutively. And there were no other transactions. And the question tells us that the end of May, the balance was $2,600. And the question is, what is the range of the monthly closing balances, meaning the difference between the greatest amount in the bank minus the least amount? So if we look at statement 1, it says the closing balance for April was less than $26.25. So April end was less than $26.25. And we know that some transaction happened on May 15th, and we need to figure out whether that was a deposit or a withdrawal. But we know that May end, the balance was $2,600. So we have two options here. If we withdrew $50 here, the balance on April end would have to be $2,650. If there's a deposit made on May 15th, then that balance at the end of April would have to be $2,480. And because we know the constraint is that the balance at the end of April is less than $2,625, this scenario is not possible, which means on May 15th, a deposit of $120 was made. Now we have to show that we are going to get different possible values for the range. So I need to look at the possible scenarios. So I know for the first 4 months, a deposit of $120 was made on each of those months on the 15th. And 120 times 4 is $480, which means that at the beginning of the year, Carl had $2,000. I'm subtracting $480 from this $2,480. So now the question is, this is $2,000. As if we look at the remaining months of the year from June to December, and we say for those months, a withdrawal of $50 was made on 15th of each of the month, then I'm going to be withdrawing a total of 6 times 50, which is $300. And my balance at the end of the year on December 31st would be $2,600 minus 300, which would be $2,300. In this case, the range, the difference between the greatest and the least would be 600, 2,600 minus 2,000. But if I say that deposits were made from say June till November, then I have 5 more months of deposits of $120, and my balance would then go up to another $600, and it would be $3,200. And then on December 15th, I can say that there was a withdrawal of $50. In this case, the balance at the end of the year would be $3,150. But the key point is now my greatest balance is $3,200, and the range, which is the difference between the greatest and the least, is going to be $1,200, which is different than $600 that I got earlier. So we don't have a unique value for the range. So statement 1 alone is insufficient. We're going to do the same thing for statement 2, which is very similar in structure. And here we're told that the balance at the end of June was less than $2,675. And we know that the balance on May end is $2,600. And we basically have some transaction that happened on June 15th. Again, we have two options. There could be a deposit of $120. But if there's a deposit, then the balance at the end of June would be $2,720, but that doesn't satisfy this constraint. So this deposit condition cannot be satisfied. So there is a withdrawal of $50, because then the balance at the end of June would be $2,550. So this is the scenario that happened on June 15th. Now we still have to show that we don't have a unique value for the range. Now if we assume that for the first 5 months, January to May, January 15th to May 15th, deposits of $120 were made, then again we would, to find the balance at the beginning of the year, we would subtract this amount from 2,600, and again, Jan 1st, the balance is $2,000. So and then we say for the remaining of the year, we're just withdrawing $50 on the 15th of the remaining 6 months. And here the range, because the maximum value still would be 2,600, the range would be 600. So that's a possible value. Then the question is, how can we get another possible value for the range? So for that, we would say that for the months of, say, February to May, on the 15th of these, that there was actually a withdrawal of $50. So I know that the balance at the end of May is 2,600, and for these 4 months, May through February, I would have withdrawn 4 times 50, which is $200. So my balance at the beginning on, or I should say on the end of January, has to be $2,800, because I've withdrawn this amount. And I can say that one deposit was made on Jan 15th. So I'm really saying the scenario is that for the month of January, a single deposit was made, and for the remaining 11 months, there were all withdrawals. So in that scenario, the balance at the end of January would be 2,800, and then the beginning of the year, because the deposit of 120 was made, would have to be 2,680. But the key thing is the range, which is the difference between the greatest and the least value, would be 2,800 is the highest amount, and then I subtract the least, which in this case would be, I would have to go back to 2,600 at the end of May, and then for the remaining 7 months, there would be 7 withdrawals of $50. So we would be withdrawing $350. So the balance at the end of the year would be 2,600 minus $350, which would be $2,250. So in this case, the range would be the difference between these two values, which is 430, which is different from 600. So the key was we don't have a unique value for the range. So statement 2 alone is also insufficient. So now we have to combine statements 1 and 2. And we know that the end of May, the balance is 2,600. And May 15th, something happened. This is April end, and then June 15th, and then June end. So we know that the closing balance here is less than 2,675. So we know that we can't have a deposit of plus 120 here, because that would go to 26. That would be 2,700. So now we need to combine statements 1 and 2. So here we're given that May end, the balance is 2,600. And May 15th, something happened, and then this is April end. And then June 15th, some transaction happened, and then this is June end. So we're given that the balance at the end of June is 2,675. So we know that we can't have a deposit of 120 on June 15th, because then the balance at the end of June would be 2,720, which doesn't satisfy this. So this condition is out, which means there was a withdrawal of $50, which means the balance at the end of June is 2,550. And likewise, we know that the balance at the end of April was less than 2625. And again, we have two options here, whether there was a deposit here, 120. If there was a deposit 120, then the balance at the end of April would be 2480. But if there was a withdrawal of $50, this balance would have to be 2650. And that's not possible because the constraint is it has to be less than 2625. So there was a deposit that day. So now we know that April end balance was 2480, May end 2600, and then June end was 2550. And I know for the remaining 6 months, there's going to be a $50 withdrawal because the withdrawals have to be in consecutive months. And we would withdraw a total of $300. The end of December, the balance is going to be $22.50. And then the question is, what is the starting balance here? And we know for the first 4 months, we're going to be depositing $120. So we would have deposited a total of 120 times 4, 480, which means that on Jan 1st, there was $2,000 in the bank. So the question is, do we have a unique value for the range? And we do. Here, the maximum value of the balance in the account is 2,600, and the least is 2,000, and the range would be 600, and we have a unique value. So statements 1 and 2 combined are sufficient, and the correct answer is C.